What's going on, guys? It's Frito here for Your Overwatch. I did get the chance to play Valorant in the boot camp weekend, like just about every content creator in the world, it feels like. So I know you're going to be spammed with a lot of Valorant content today, but I thought it was a good opportunity to review the game, give you my impressions, but perhaps more importantly for the Overwatch community, look at this new entry into the FPS space as a lens to reevaluate where Overwatch sits and how they compare, or perhaps don't, to one another. And that's where I want to start. I think a lot of people look to the two games and see that they have heroes or agents with abilities and assume they're similar, but honestly, that can't be further from the truth. Valorant is far more a CSGO archetype game, and Overwatch is way more of a MOBA game with FPS elements, or vice versa, depending on which meta you're in, right? In truth, Valorant and Overwatch, from every step of design, are made for two completely different audiences. And I just so happen to fit in both, thankfully. I'm like a kid in a candy store with my pick of any game I want, but I know not every player is like me, and many of you will fit into one of two camps, and that's where I want to try to separate in this video. A good way to describe this, I think, is just looking at one aspect of each game and how it's emblematic of how those games are designed. So when you first look at Valorant, you notice that the graphics don't look flashy. They don't look appealing, at least not as appealing as the whimsical Disney-esque Overwatch style that sort of makes you fall in love with the characters and environments immediately. The abilities in Valorant look kind of basic. The maps are plain, but in truth, all of this is a design choice in order to make clean gameplay be the forefront. When you play the game, you realize how easy it is to differentiate between the different smokes and abilities that are getting used. I know from a new player's perspective, it might get confusing with a lot of stuff going on, but with the combination of very clean sound cues and very clear basic visual style, navigating the game and playing it felt very intuitive to me, even though I haven't played CS in years. And this is very intentional with the basic design of everything. It's very clear. There's no ambiguity because the graphics aren't complex enough to build any confusion. Where in Valorant, the hardcore experience is at the core of everything that they designed it to be, whereas in Overwatch, in many, many cases, the feel and the immersion and the fantasy of the game is far more important than the utmost competitive integrity. And I don't think this is a secret or even a knock on the game per se. It is if you're in the most hardcore perspective, that when an Overwatch developer says that ranked mode isn't the most competitive system, and it's their intention to be playable for the type of player that wants to kick off some steam after work. Compare that to Valorant. In a recent video they uploaded, the director of the game literally said the game's not for everybody, right? Completely different perspectives. One requires you to study and train, and the other one is trying to be more inclusive. Just imagine for a moment Jeff Kaplan responding to someone talking about hero imbalances or how difficult the game is or something, and he responds in saying, "Get good." That's effectively what I'm saying, how the Riot devs talk about Valorant. And in some ways it's refreshing, but it also kind of takes you aback if you're a casual player or find that attitude alienating. That just goes to show you the very different audiences that these games are aiming to serve. And the truth is, I love both of them once you know which one is for you. In the most hardcore sense, for an esports title, Overwatch has let me down. There's just no other way to say it. It's very underdeveloped in that aspect because it is not focusing on it. Don't get me wrong, Overwatch tries to be an esport, but when you consider things like 222 just came out in the game's life, we're still figuring out what the format even is. Whereas the diffuse game type is a ready-made packaged deal that solves so many problems that Overwatch still is trying to figure out how to deal with. For example, because items in Valorant, just like Counter-Strike, are tied to an economy system, there's natural limits and diversity of gameplay just based on what you can afford for a given round. Let me give you some cool examples. When you're winning, the enemy can take weapons that are better at rushing you down. So although a gun like the AWP, the sniper rifle, is going to dominate against rifles a lot of times, if you miss your first shot, guns that run at you that are relatively cheap have a chance to trade you out kind of easily. But those guns suck against normal rifles, at least when they're played properly. So what develops here then is the concept of an anti-eco weapon, or a sort of midway point between the best stuff and the cheapest stuff, guns that are good at dealing with that rush you down with an economy weapon playstyle, because they either can deal with multiple targets and kind of spray and pray, or the weapon isn't insane when you pick it up, right? If 5 guys rush you down in Valorant and you've got an AWP, maybe you kill 1, but they trade you out. Losing it, they get that gun now, and it's going to be tough for your teammates to then retake into the AWP that you dropped for them. So you see where there's a strategy then of what guns you pick when, and there never is a case where one thing is always the best, unless you never miss, right? That reminds me, there is, of course, just the depth of the gunplay anyway, which changes how all of these guns perform. A pistol might be cheap, the revolver is much less than a rifle, but if you hit a very difficult one tap to the head, the enemy can be one shot, just as if you had a rifle yourself. So there's these natural ways where the skill you put in can bring out big plays that make lower tier items even better, but there's also a circulation of the different types of weapons and the different scenarios anyway, just for the different positions on the map or the round state based on the economy. In comparison, Overwatch has nothing like this, right? Not really. There very rarely is a reason not to pick the best comp every time. I'm sure Valorant is going to have the same problem though that Overwatch does, where certain characters are probably just going to be meta, but Valorant solves that problem as well, where, as far as I know, with League of Legends, and it's the same with Valorant, that characters in Riot Games have far more overlap. On purpose. In Valorant, there is a lot of variations of smokes or gaining vision or setting up duels, but a lot of them are very closely related. And that makes it easier to have parity among the choices when the difference between them isn't as severe, because smokes are incredibly important in Valorant and CSGO, but every character basically has one. A few don't, but it's very common that most characters in Riot Games have the necessary components to play, and that might make the gameplay look more stale to you, but again, this is a competitive integrity decision. For example, if we take Valorant's philosophy into Overwatch, well, as soon as we realize that Lucio is like a dominant meta component for the rushdown playstyle, and let's say we wanted the rushdown playstyle to exist, well, there'd be like 5 options for speeding people around, right? But the developers for Overwatch have explicitly said that they don't want ability overlap whenever possible, which is why it seems like they're kind of boxed in to try to make every hero unique, and it doesn't always have the best side effects. Because often I feel like the character designs are more about asking what would be cool and different rather than what would promote better gameplay. I don't even think that's controversial to say at all, because how many times in Overwatch have we just wound up in a very degenerative top-level meta? It just happens over and over again, right? And that's because Overwatch isn't designed with the intention to affect that high-level gameplay first and foremost. It's intended to try to be fun when you pick it up and play it. Whereas Valorant is like the opposite. It is only fun when you master it. It isn't fun just to jump in. You have to get good, otherwise you will probably hate the game. Conversely, Overwatch is a lot more fun to get into immediately, but I think lacks the depth and competitive longevity that Valorant is attacking. And that always was a problem with the way a lot of people approach Overwatch. It's not a problem for me anymore. I love Overwatch, perhaps even more now than before, but it's because I've changed my perspective on it. You see, when you realize that Overwatch isn't actually a esports dedicated game, but instead is a fun game that you should try to play less seriously than other esports, then you can enjoy it more. The more I play the casual aspects of Overwatch and don't expect there to be a ton of depth and design for the competitive elements, the more I enjoy it. I don't think it's a stretch to say that Overwatch is designed for the quick play and arcade experience, whereas Valorant from the top down is built for esports. And anybody that gets into it is playing that same difficult, punishing esports game. But let's be clear, Overwatch has different strengths that Valorant can't add up to. Despite all the benefits that I would praise Valorant for, with how much it does respect competitive integrity, what it doesn't do very well is the new user experience. A new player coming into it is going to get thrashed in this game, and it's going to be very painful just to begin learning the necessary components just to start being effective, right? This is what's described as a very high skill floor, meaning you have to gain a lot of mastery before you even can begin playing. Whereas Overwatch is the other way, where there's a lot of intuitiveness actually to playing the game. If you've ever played a MOBA or shooter or World of Warcraft for that matter, where you see a teammate, you apply a heal, right? You're a tank, you go swing on something. You can get a base level of value just by pressing buttons in Overwatch, where it's easy to learn and very difficult to master at the same time. That's beautiful design. Whereas Valorant, if you don't know to stop moving before you shoot, some guns you will just never get a kill on. And that goes for basically any mechanic. If you don't know how to play a certain part of the map or how an ability interaction works, you will just die over and over again, and the game kind of relentlessly beats you into the ground until you learn it. Whereas Overwatch has a lot of ways where it kind of carries you along and allows you to contribute without knowing what you're doing. Or the huge mistakes that you're making aren't readily apparent and obvious, despite the millions of mistakes every player in Overwatch makes constantly without knowing. Overwatch at its highest point is exactly as in depth, but at its more average baseline, the responsibility for your own gameplay is more easily put onto your teammates, and it feels a lot easier to blame your team for everything. Whereas in Valorant, yeah, your team might suck, but end of the day, your kills come down to you. The excuses aren't as easy to come by. There isn't as much deflection of responsibility just in the natural state of playing the game. And now for the last section of the video, I wanted to talk about how abilities work in the two games. I've seen a lot of talk downplaying the ability power in Valorant, and I'm surprised actually. I think the abilities are incredibly powerful and will be the be-all end-all for the high-level gameplay. But I think the reason why they've been kind of understated is because at sort of the average player experience, a lot of people don't master the utility in CSGO now, right? At the pro level, they can combine multiple smokes together to make perfect executes to take over the map. So in Valorant, I think you can be fooled into thinking that you don't have to learn that sort of stuff, but you really do. But the power level of those things is only slightly more than we've seen in the likes of Counter-Strike. There's a few things that can straight up kill you, but it's not like Overwatch where the plays are extremely over the top, right? Like High Noon can kill the whole team. Diva Bomb with a Reinhardt pin drops the shield, everybody dies, right? It isn't that severe. Things that are lethal in the game have much more build up, much more wind up, much more setup required, much more timing, much more coordination, and they're just slower overall. So it's not like abilities are attacking each other like they are in Overwatch at all, but there is definitely the depth of strategy that I feel you have to learn, otherwise you're not getting to a high rank. Like anybody saying that you can just take aim duels all day in this game, I think isn't really being real with how the game's going to develop as it gets mastered over time. But the question is, what percentage of the game do those abilities take up? It is accurate to say that in Valorant, the abilities aren't most of the game. They're a means to an end to establish a gunfight most of the time. There's a character that has an aerial strike ultimate that goes through cover and everything. You press a button, in a couple seconds, it gets blasted with a laser and anybody in it dies. But more often than not, because enemies can run out of it anyway, you either have to time it perfectly, or more often, the enemy runs out of it, but exposes themselves to a gunfight, which they're disadvantaged in as they scramble away from the explosion, right? There's more things like that in the game, where the ability forces the movement that sets up for the kill. So when people say the phrase utility, even the things that have damage are almost more utility than damage. In CSGO, for example, the grenade didn't do much to targets that have armor. So whereas a grenade in Call of Duty can get multi-kills, grenades in CSGO are more a little bit of pressure damage, right? There's a lot of abilities that are like that can set up for an advantage in a gunfight for sure, but there's no escaping that you have to get good at the gun mechanics if you want to be good at Valorant. Whereas Overwatch is always kind of in conflict with itself, where certain aspects of it want to promote FPS skill and shooter mechanics, but the MOBA elements always essentially win out. Whereas at every step of the way, Valorant, though does have many MOBA-esque type abilities in it, the percentage of the game it takes up is just far, far lower. Where at most, the game might be 50% about utility or abilities. Whereas in Overwatch, if you pick a certain character, you might have no shooter mechanics to worry about. It's not like Reinhardt has to shoot an AK at any point, right? You only have to learn his mechanics. So because of that, Overwatch is a far more inclusive game. And what it all comes down to is which which one of these fits your needs. I've explained a whole bunch of different elements, and at the end of the day, I love both games. As an extreme hardcore gamer, though, Valorant is exactly what I'm looking for. I love the game to an unhealthy level. I can't wait to start playing it again, but it doesn't replace where Overwatch is in my heart anyway, because I've already moved my expectations of it severely. I'm not really grinding Overwatch to become the best player I can be. I've hit top 500 a couple times, but largely I feel the experience of grinding in Overwatch is very unrewarding, whereas when I shift to try to have fun with it, I enjoy it a lot. And I don't think Valorant can be played that way, really. There's not a mode to do so. You just sort of get wrecked if you're trying to kick back and play an easier character or something. There's no option like that at all. So because of that, both games are going to be taking up a lot of my time for different reasons. And you can expect, of course, Your Overwatch not to go anywhere. We'll still be covering Overwatch. Don't worry. In fact, I've been more interested in some of the higher effort hardcore guide videos on this channel, and we've got more coming down the line, as well as just cover it from a community aspect as well. It's not going anywhere. But if you also want to go down the Valorant journey with me and are interested in how that game develops, or want to start learning the game yourself, our second channel, Clickheads, is dedicated to Valorant for the foreseeable future. The whole team is back making content for Valorant on Clickheads. Eddie, Liam, and myself will be covering the news updates, as well as trying to help out that new player experience, teaching you the fundamentals so that you can get into the game and begin enjoying it. So if you're interested in checking out those videos, please be sure to check the link in the description to go subscribe to Clickheads. It would mean a lot to us. And for my first epic length video, I made a giant breakdown of all of the characters and their abilities, as well as some pretty important tips on how to utilize them properly after 3 days of playing the game myself. Just like everything in Valorant, the abilities are a bit more complicated than Overwatch, and you're gonna find that it's difficult to just pick up and play and get use out of something without the tactics of knowing when to use something and why. Click the link in the description to subscribe to Clickheads. Other than that, guys, if you did enjoy this video, leave it a like on your way out and subscribe if you haven't already. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for Your Overwatch. We'll see you guys next time.